He left me alone in the storm, not for work, not for family, but for her. After 40 years of marriage, I watched my husband choose his first love over me as Hurricane K tore through our lives. But the real destruction wasn't the wind or the rain, it was realizing that our entire love story might have been a lie. My 65-year-old husband left me to be with his first love as the hurricane approached. I told him I was fearful of the storm and pleaded with him to stay, but he just told me to stop fussing. Renee is the one who is concerned, she has always been afraid of storms like this, and she always needs me. Javier had spent practically every day hurrying to see Renee, his first love, whom he hadn't seen in 50 years, since they reunited. Now, as Hurricane K raged outside, he answered her call and instantly reached for his coat. The wind howled against the windows, and I pleaded with him to stay, even breaking down in tears, but he looked at me and said, "Listen, Leslie. Renee only came to the city because of me. I can't just leave her alone." The storm destroyed the house where I had lived for 40 years, and Javier destroyed the marriage and love I had developed with him. Later, when I filed for divorce, he wouldn't leave and followed me around begging. With 2 weeks ago, a user named Hugh posted online asking for assistance in finding his mother's first love. His mother had met her first love as a teenager, but they were split up due to miscommunications, and now, 50 years later, he stated, "It's always been you. I have only ever loved you." She still couldn't let go of him. Their love story moved me deeply, but then I saw the man's name and photo and realized they were looking for Javier, the man I had loved my entire life. On the day Renee and Javier reconnected online, they met at the airport, hugging and wiping away each other's tears. The internet went viral as people celebrated their long-lost love and offered blessings to the couple who had finally reunited after 50 years apart. In the meantime, I, Javier's wife of more than 40 years, was removed from their story as if I had never been there. Renee's return turned my Javier made arrangements for her to stay at a hotel close to our house, and for days, he left early and came back late, spending all of his time with her. Even at home, I was able to stay up to date on their activities by looking at pictures of them sitting together at concerts that excited strangers posted online. Lizzie, Renee and I haven't seen each other in decades, so we're just reminiscing. Don't be unhappy, Shek will be gone in a few days, and then everything will return to normal. Their interactions are far too personal for merely old acquaintances catching up. I looked at Javier at 65. When I reached for his hand, Javier exclaimed quietly, "The weather's been bad these past few days, and my legs have been acting up again. Could you stay home just for today?" His hair had turned gray, but his posture remained straight, and his frame was still lean, leaving behind remnants of his youthful charm. "Sincere, are you feeling ill again? Did the pain flare up in your joints?" He gently lifted my leg onto his lap and started massaging it, feeling the warmth of his palms move through me and stirring something deep inside. This pain had been there since I gave birth to our child, and at that time, Javier was at a critical stage of his career where he spent the majority of his time in the lab, leaving me to take care of the baby and do all the housework by myself. Over the years, my health had deteriorated due to a series of illnesses, and whenever the weather got bad, my leg pain got worse. Javier had been massaging my legs for decades, but today he only gave me a few. Before getting up, I gave Lizzie a few quick rubs. I told Renee that I would meet her at a specific time, but I had to leave, so I watched his retreating figure and noticed the slight excitement in his hurried steps. A bitter taste filled my mouth, and I shook my head and laughed quietly to myself. After 40 years of marriage, we had endured a lot. Even though I should trust him, the dull ache in my leg kept throbbing and wouldn't go away by evening. Despite our many arguments over the years, I always made Javier's breakfast and dinner the way he liked when we were young and money was tight. In the dim yellow light, Javier's deep-set eyes were full of tenderness and concern, but the truth was that he went hungry far too often. We spent years barely making ends meet and frequently going to bed hungry. His youthful devotion left its mark on my heart during those years, and he eventually developed a chronic stomach condition. Perhaps this is why, even after all these years, I still prefer the warmth of soft golden lighting. However, tonight, instead of waiting for Javier to come home, I received a hurried phone call saying, "Lizzie, Renee's leg is bothering her. Taking her to the hospital, I won't be returning home tonight, so don't wait up for me." I was stunned as I stared at my phone. Javier had never hung up on me so suddenly, and he had always been considerate of my feelings. I swallowed my rage, made myself finish dinner, and mechanically cleaned up the dishes that night, but he didn't come back, and I didn't sleep. Instead, I lay awake, going over the decades we'd spent together, reliving every moment of love and devotion that had long since become a part of me. I couldn't sleep because the night's silence was so heavy on me, and I walked to his study without thinking. A familiar smell of old paper and tattered leather filled the room as I stood there, taking it all in, as though I could still feel him sitting at his desk, leafing through his books, totally engrossed in his world. I felt a pain in my chest that I couldn't identify, so I reached for the books he used to read most frequently while running my fingers along their spines before removing them one by one from the shelf. Then, inside one of them, a folded piece of paper slipped out and fell to the ground. It was a medical report. I picked it up, my fingers shaking, and as I unfolded it, the name at the top made my chest tighten and my breath catch. I tightened my grip on the paper as a flood of memories smashed into me as I read the report, my heart thumping louder with every line. Her diagnosis was that her condition and leg had been injured, causing her to suffer whenever the weather turned cold, just like me. Javier was kneeling next to me, applying warm hands to my sore joints. He practiced the motions and knew exactly where the pain was the worst and how much pressure to apply. For 40 years, he had been massaging my legs with a precision that now felt eerie because he had done it for I sank onto the chair, holding the paper in my hands, as the weight of everything settled in the decades we had shared the love. I had never questioned the truth, had never thought about whether he had been thinking of me all these years, or if I had just been the one standing where she used to be. She let out a choked sob while tears clouded my vision. When Javier finally arrived home at dawn, he was carrying a bag of croissants from my favorite bakery. He froze for a moment when he saw me, a rare flicker of guilt flashing across his face. "You're up early," he said hesitantly, even though my body was shaking and I thought I had made peace with our past, but it seemed to have not yet finished with me. I looked at him without saying anything. "Where did you sleep last night?" he asked. "I was worried sick at the hospital." He moved closer, reaching for my hand and Renee's leg, which she had damaged years ago while attempting to save me. Ever since then, severe weather has made it worse. Renee's leg hurts when the weather changes, too, so I quickly withdrew my hand. My voice was unnaturally calm. "Javier, all these years ago, when you massaged my leg, were you thinking about me or her?" I knew I was being crazy, but after I kept it in all night, I couldn't put out the fire inside of me. Javier's face darkened. "What are you even saying? After 40 years of dating, you're doubting my loyalty?" I folded my arms, "But you haven't responded. Are you feeling bad about how often he thought about her?" Even in our life together, Javier's temper flared up because of what Leslie had done. "We've been together for over 40 years, and we still have a lot of years left, but Renee is all she has these few days," and his voice became sharper. "She's waited 50 years for these few days, so please stop making I closed my eyes tightly, swallowing all the emotions rushing inside of me. When I opened them again, I was calm. "Javier, if you care about Renee so much, there is another way." I calmly met his stare. "When did you become so unreasonable?" What a silly thing to say. Javier's eyes widened in surprise. "Are you crazy over something so trivial, Lizzie? Is this necessary after everything we've been through? Do you still doubt my loyalty? Have you forgotten the vows we made back then? Let's get a divorce so she can be the one to be by your side for the rest of your days." Renee wasn't alone in this city. Her son, Hugh, was here with her, so she never needed anything. In college, Javier meant to go through life together, so my voice was calm. "I'll give you some time to think about what you want." I stopped doing his laundry and cooking his meals every day. I just made enough food for myself. Javier continued to visit Renee every day, ate his meals outside, and came home late because he couldn't bring himself to let her go, carrying my favorite fruits and fresh flowers as if nothing had changed. He would talk about his day, filling the air with unimportant details, as if our argument had never occurred. I ignored him, and before I knew it, the hurricane was coming. Having lived in Florida for years, I was used to hurricanes, but this one was stronger than the others. The whole city braced itself, and our son Daniel called to beg us to go, even though he had bought us plane tickets. I considered leaving, but ultimately chose to stay because this was the first house Javier and I had purchased after getting married, and we had lived here for more than 40 years. We even renovated it a while back, but I wasn't prepared to leave on the day I went to buy supplies. I drove alone to the grocery store and loaded my cart to the brim. After checking out, I stared at the 2 oversized bags of groceries and, against my better judgment, called Javier. When he didn't answer, I recalled that he had said he would be saying goodbye to Renee. I sighed today, pushed the cart outside, and started the tedious process of packing everything into the trunk. As I leaned over to pick up another bag, I noticed something in the corner of my eye. Javier and Renee were pushing a shopping cart full of supplies. Renee's son, Hugh, was behind them, and they appeared to be getting along well. Anyone walking by would think they were a family of 3. Javier saw me and stopped suddenly, his eyes falling to the heavy bags at my feet and his brows furrowing. "Why are you lifting all that by yourself? You should have called me, it would have been helpful." I took out my phone and waved it at him. "You didn't respond, so I assumed you." His face tensed as we arrived at the airport. "I apologize, I must Have left my phone on quiet. Renee's flight was cancelled, so I accompanied them to get some supplies. Before I could reply, she smiled warmly and said, "You must be Leslie Javier talking about you." I smiled back at her, and he wasn't exaggerating when he said, "You're kind and gentle, it's so lovely to finally meet you. How are you feeling these days? Did you enjoy staying here?" "Oh, I love the climate," she said brightly. "Javier invited me to stay and settle down here, and he's been so generous that he even helped you find a job in town, and it looks like we'll be seeing each other a lot. I hope that won't disturb you and Javier." My stomach turned, and I answered in an emotionless voice, "Congratulations on finding a place you love." I didn't want to analyze a single detail. Her words, and I lacked the energy to separate the truth from the lies, but I was certain that Javier had misled me about the flight not being cancelled. Daniel had called me earlier to inform me that flights were still scheduled for today, so I turned on my heel and got into my car without giving Javier another look, and drove away. Javier and I met in college, where we spent some of the best years of our lives together. We were young, ambitious, and full of hopes and dreams for the future. Ours wasn't a fast-paced romance that started at first sight, but rather a gradual connection between two people brought together by the quiet accumulation of time and understanding. Javier took my hands in his and said, "The past is gone, buried like yesterday's sunset. My heart belongs to you now for the rest of my life." The day Javier confessed his feelings for me, he was honest about his past. He told me about Renee, the girl he had once loved in his youth, the one with whom he had shared his early dreams. He kept his word after we were married, supporting my career wholeheartedly and taking pride in my accomplishments without ever making me feel inferior. At home, unlike other men who shrugged off responsibilities, he shared the burdens. "It is my promise that I will cherish and honor you throughout my life, as true as the rising sun and the setting moon." Javier was a man of principles, steadfast and honorable. But for Renee, he lied to me. The very morals that had defined him and guided him throughout his life seemed to no longer matter. They were a tight, invisible net. For decades, he did his part without complaint, and I never once questioned his love or integrity. From the reflection in the car window, I saw my face streaked with tears, pale and hollow, my cheeks as cold as my heart. By the time the hurricane hit land, Javier had finally returned, fighting against the wind and rain. The wrap around my chest was squeezing, filling every breath with sharp, stinging pain. I had filled every possible container with water, charged all of our electronics, and made the house as safe as possible. I pulled the sofa into the hallway, away from the wind, where Javier and I huddled, waiting for the worst to pass. The storm smashed the windows, shaking the house so violently that I felt lightheaded. The unrelenting force of nature was making my head spin. Just as the nausea started to creep in, Javier pulled me into his arms. He was old now, and his arms, which had once been firm, had lost their strength, and his skin was wrinkled and spotted with age spots. But these were the same arms that had supported me through every phase of our lives, from youth to middle age, through joys and sorrows, no matter what. They were always there for me when I needed them, dazed. I heard myself ask, "Is Renee staying here for good, Leslie?" And he said, "She's leaving immediately after the hurricane, you have to believe me." I helped her younger son, Hugh, find a job, but I never invited her to stay. With her older son soon not here, I wanted to believe him and say something else. But before I could, his phone rang, and Renee was crying and trembling as she begged him to help her. Javier's voice softened instantly, telling Renee it's okay, don't worry. The hotel is safe, so don't worry. Just wait a little while longer, I'll arrive as soon as the winds stop. The illusion of warmth was destroyed, so I remained silent and ducked deeper into the sofa corner. Javier gave me a hesitant glance though he was trying to find the proper words, but ultimately he said nothing at all. When the storms I passed and the winds subsided, there was a brief period of unsettling calm. Javier got up right away and grabbed his keys to leave, and I silently watched him at the door as he turned back to Leslie. I got up from the sofa and walked out onto the balcony below, where Javier was struggling to start the electric scooter. I called him Javier and said, "Stay here, I'll be back soon." There was a lengthy delay before he ended the call, and as I stood there watching his figure vanish into the storm, I suddenly remembered another hurricane that had occurred 30 years prior. We've lived through hurricanes for decades, so we know how to handle them, but Renee is different. She only came here because of me, and I can't leave her alone. Javier had been at the lab, too busy to come home, so I had been alone. Tonight, I was hiding in the hallway as the storm raged around me. I was younger, afraid, and cold, so I called him, and as soon as the storm's eye reached me, he returned. He had come back for me, covered in rain and mud, his eyes full of only anxiety and urgency. That night, he drove me to safety, navigating past fallen billboards and avoiding uprooted trees while continuously watching over his shoulder as though he was terrified the storm would strike at any time. I had held his hand tightly, believing with all my heart. My heart was that he was the best choice I had ever made, but when the hurricane passed, he left to console another woman, leaving me behind. The hurricane had broken the living room window, left glass all over the floor, scattered furniture, and left the area that had been our home completely destroyed. When Javier came back, I was already packed, so I met him first. My calm, steady voice may have unnerved him, or perhaps it was his guilt, but I could see the panic flash in his eyes as he awkwardly knelt next to me and tried to soothe Lizzie. Renee is okay now, and Shek will be going once. In a few days, flights will start, but it doesn't matter because I stopped what I was doing and looked into his eyes. It doesn't matter, Javier, if Renee stays or leaves. When she does, it has nothing to do with me anymore. We're divorcing, so you may be with her if you want to. I'm calm. I motioned around us, and you knew I would be. Want Lizzie? Don't argue that his voice wasn't angry this time. He was simply pleading that you're upset because I went to Renee's last night. Let's not make any snap judgments. I'm furious because you knew I would be scared, but you still went with Renee when I asked you to consider what you truly wanted. I don't need to wait for your response since I've already witnessed it for myself. I'm divorcing you regardless of whether Renee stays or goes, but since this is my decision, I've given it a lot of thought, and you know me, Javier, once I make a decision, I don't change it. His face froze, and his eyes took on a deep plea. Does this have to happen, Lizzie? I promise you, Renee is leaving, and she and I won't be in contact again after this. For more than 40 years, I never once questioned your love, but Renee's return made me realize that I was never your first. I sighed. Javier, can't we just walk away from that emotion that overtook him? And for the first time, I saw tears spill from his weary eyes. Choice, I was simply the person you settled for. You may claim that you never betrayed our agreement, but can you honestly say that your love for me was sincere after all these years? Lizzie, we've been together for a lifetime. Does it matter if you were my first choice or not? What matters is that I was faithful to you. There is nothing more to say, Javier. This is exhausting. I've already contacted a lawyer to draft the divorce papers, my bags are packed, and I'm moving out today. Yes, your loyalty mattered. I met his eyes without wavering, but now I'm not even sure if you were kind to me during all those years. You were thinking of me or her. In the end, I didn't move out. Instead, Javier packed his belongings and moved into another property under his name for a few days. When the paperwork is ready, I'll get in touch with you so we can file for divorce. At the courthouse before we leave. When the paperwork was ready, Javier and I cleaned the house together because it held over 40 years of memories in every corner. On the first day that flights resumed, he stopped returning Renee's calls and went to the airport to say goodbye. When he returned, he brought my favorite flowers, but I knew that there was no turning back from his disappointment and sadness. Nothing made me feel anything. All that was left between us was the connection of two people who had once come through life together. Daniel flew in the same day he learned we were divorcing, and his response was intense. Mom, I don't understand, he said urgently. You and Dad have been together for so long, and he just spent a few days with an old friend. Why? Are you making such a big deal out of this, Mom? He asked. I would fully support your choice, but now that Renee is gone, can't you and Dad just return to how things were? His eyes looked into mine with optimism, and I sighed. You make it seem so easy, I said softly, but if I pushed a thorn into your heart, would just removing it make it easier? I'm not asking for your approval, Daniel. I'm telling you that you've been married for years and have your own family, so my divorce from your father won't have an impact on you or cause you any anxiety. I won't be moving in with you and Mila, and I won't interfere with your lives. Daniel, steady and unflinching, hesitated, his face changing with uneasiness, and then abruptly his voice rose in irritation. What are you saying? Do you think I wouldn't take care of you? Javier responded in a quiet, measured tone. Don't argue. It was something we had previously discussed. We own separate properties so that even after the divorce, neither of us would impose on our children's lives. Daniel still wanted to argue, but Mila gently pulled away. With your mother, we've already made our decision. We both have homes, savings, and pensions. We can take care of ourselves. You don't need to worry about us. Daniel isn't against your divorce because he's worried about himself. It's just that you and Javier are older. If you live together, at least you have each other to rely on. If you separate, who will look after you when you're ill? She turned to me and spoke in a softer tone. I patted her hand reassuringly, knowing that you are both looking out for us, but marriage isn't something you just settle for. Even though Javier and I are divorced, the years we spent together don't vanish. I know this hurts you, but are you willing to throw away decades of marriage because of someone who doesn't even matter anymore? The divorce process went smoothly on the day we received the final papers. Javier and I had a quiet dinner together. Before saying our goodbyes at the street corner, I turned around once he was still standing. It's not like we'll never speak again, we'll still be there for each other when it matters. His red-rimmed eyes watched me, and I took one last look, before turning away and moving on without thinking. After the divorce, I found that I had a lot of free time, so the following day I enrolled in a floral arrangement class. When I was younger, I was preoccupied with work, school, and family. Javier and I had planned to travel together in our later years, but those plans had changed, so I decided to travel alone on a lengthy road trip, embarking on a journey that was exclusively mine. I stayed in the same house and continued to help Daniel raise his kids after retirement. After Javier's presence had been woven into my life for decades, I occasionally still called his name out of habit without giving it any thought. Untangling. It was difficult, so I enrolled in community volunteer work in addition to my floral classes every morning after class. One afternoon after finishing my work, I was walking home when I noticed Javier waiting at my doorstep. I hesitated because he had been stopping by every day. I would put on my volunteer vest and walk around the neighborhood with a few friends, looking for people in need of assistance. Life became lively and full again. However, I had been avoiding him for a few days. Our divorce had appeared to be amicable at first, but after loving someone for a lifetime and having it end in such a terrible way, I still harbored a bitter grudge. I naturally moved away, hiding behind a tree on the corner of the street, unwilling to confront him, but then I saw a figure run past me and snatched Javier's sleeve. Renee's urgent voice asked, "Why didn't you tell me you and Lizzie got divorced? If you hadn't told me, I wouldn't even know how you could be living alone like this." Javier flinched, obviously shocked, looked around, and then carefully pulled his. "Hugh told me about the divorce, so I returned right away, Javier. I can't just leave you alone, let me take care of you from now on." Javier was silent for a long time before he finally said, "I thought you left. Why are you back?" Renee's eyes brightened, and her voice was soft with emotion. "I was glad to see you again after 50 years, and I wanted to be a good host to make sure you were taken care of, but I need you to understand that I no longer feel the same way about you." Gradually, I realized that my actions over the past few weeks caused misunderstandings, and both you and Leslie misinterpreted my intentions, which is why she left me. Renee reacted immediately, saying, "I don't care about your love for Lizzie, it doesn't matter if you don't have feelings for me anymore. I know this may hurt you, but I have to say it. After we parted ways all those years ago, I met Lizzie, and from that moment on, my heart belonged to her." Javier sat silent for a while, then he breathed and spoke in a firm but quiet voice, saying, "Renee, I may be divorced, but I can take care of myself. You don't have to go to such lengths for me if you visit. I just want to be by your side, even as a friend, and that's enough for me." He turned and left after saying, "Florida, just spend time with Hugh, but don't come looking for me again." Renee stood motionless for a while before reluctantly following him. I remained hidden behind the tree until they were both gone, then I came out and walked home, my feelings jangled. For the first time in a long time, Javier's words made me feel something deep inside. I was quietly relieved that at least the previous 40 years hadn't been a mistake. For the next month, Javier didn't appear again, and I learned that Renee had been obstinate and wouldn't let go until Javier finally lost patience and said something hurtful enough to drive her crazy. In the meantime, I finished my floral design degree in 2 months, and on the day of my last class, I used my funds to purchase an RV. 2 days later, I packed a few necessities, took a big breath, and drove off, with a brand new RV following closely behind me. It was Javier, whom I knew, but I never acknowledged it. I traveled the country and documented my journey on Instagram, gradually gaining followers who enjoyed my solitary adventures. Javier followed, never getting in the way, never talking, and never getting too close. 3 months later, I arrived in Chicago. My first stop was my alma mater, the exact spot where Javier and I had first met all those years ago. That evening, I asked him to accompany me, and we walked back the paths we had taken as young students, making new memories and pictures after months of traveling. When it was time to leave the city, I waved him goodbye and said, with a slight smile, "I think I'd like to see it on my own." Javier looked noticeably better, his posture stronger, his eyes clearer, and he still had the same quiet admiration for me that he had once shown me when we were young. Posts made my account go viral. It all began months ago when a follower identified him as the man from Hugh's popular love story. Soon after, people started bombarding my comments, requesting confirmation, and more people started snooping around in my relationship with Javier, curious about what had transpired between him and Renee. The sudden spike in when people realized the whole tale, many were left stunned, but then the real commotion started. I posted a brief explanation of the matter since I felt overwhelmed by the attention. I made it clear that Javier, Renee, and I had all moved on with our different lives and that there was no drama remaining. One comment in particular caught everyone's attention when internet sleuths returned to Hugh's original post with a flurry of new comments. I know the woman from Hugh's post, Renee, and I found it ironic because I'm her neighbor. Her story seems heartwarming at first, but if you look at when she set out to find Javier, she boasted to the neighbors about how wonderful her first love was. On the timeline, she married someone else shortly after she and Javier broke up. She had 3 sons and 2 daughters, none of whom were particularly successful, and she struggled financially after her husband passed away last year. Looking at it now, this supposed reunion after decades apart was nothing more than a calculated plan to take advantage of him. I'm not sure why it didn't work out in the end, but it did end Javier's marriage, and now she's back, and she said he would take care of her and help her sons land good jobs. People on the internet who had formerly sincerely rooted for their love story felt betrayed upon finding they had been duped, and Swift and her kids are upset with her for not getting her first love's financial assistance. Relentlessly, Hugh, whose account belonged to Renee's youngest kid, received criticism until he eventually deleted his page. As for Renee, she was in a terrible condition and had no support or savings. She was pathetic, but I didn't feel sorry for her because she had gambled. She paid the price for being deceitful. The internet's interest blazed for a while before moving on to the next subject as usual, but I stayed focused on my journey, traveling, documenting moments with my lens, and sharing the beauty of the world as I saw it. Javier continued to message me every day. Sharing snippets of his journey, he talked about everything in great detail, from the taste of his morning coffee to the wildflowers blooming by the highway. At times, I would respond by telling him about my travels. We conversed casually, like old friends, but neither of us dared to acknowledge the deeper undercurrents beneath our stories. A year later, I finally realized a childhood dream. I traveled to Alaska. I had always wanted to see the northern lights and feel the unadulterated peace of nature, unaffected by the bustle of the outside world, but life had always gotten in the way, repeatedly delaying the trip. When I finally got to Alaska, the harsh weather hit me with a force I wasn't prepared for. It was so cold that every breath felt like shards of ice piercing my lungs. My hands became so stiff against the steering wheel that I could hardly hold onto it, and I had to hire a local guide to help me navigate the journey one afternoon. When I stopped at a tiny cafe in Fairbanks, clad in layers of scarves and holding a cup of hot, steaming cocoa in an attempt to warm my icy fingers, I noticed Javier standing outside on a street corner, gazing off into the distance while he stared at the snow-capped mountains, to which he had lost weight and snowflakes clung. Despite the years and everything that time had taken from us, I instantly recognized him with his coat dusting his shoulders, making him appear more lonely than I had ever seen him. He turned his eyes to meet mine through the cafe window, hesitated for a second, and then a smile appeared on his face that took when we first met 40 years ago, on a sunny afternoon on our college campus. He came in and sat across from me, ordering a black coffee. Neither of us said anything at first. We just sat there and watched the snow fall outside the window. When Alaska questioned why, he smiled slightly and shrugged, wanting to. He didn't elaborate, so I didn't push him to see the northern lights. I stayed in Alaska for a few more days. But the weather didn't get any better. The cold seeped into my bones, making it hard to walk. Eventually, I had to leave early, so I traveled south to San Francisco, California. I rented a little apartment by the sea, and my days were calm and leisurely as I drank floral tea and watched the golden sun set into the waters. Then, at dusk, Javier reappeared, and the sky was burning in hues of gold and crimson that stretched forever across the water. He sat next to me as we watched the sun set beyond the horizon and the sky grow darker into twilight. Then, as night fell, he slowly reached out and brushed his fingers against mine as if he were asking for permission. I didn't look at him, I just sat there and watched him walk along the shoreline, his steps leisurely, the sea breeze ruffling his graying hair. Stood up and went back inside. From that day on, Javier continued to follow me around in silence. Neither of us anticipated that life's biggest surprises would often come as a surprise. I had planned to hike the Grand Canyon. When I got a call from Daniel's mother, Mike, who had arrived at Northwestern. We were throwing him a celebration party, and you and Dad had to. Warmth filled my chest as I read about the news from Northwestern University, where Javier and I had first met and where our youth was engraved in every lecture hall and corridor. Our grandson was set to follow in our footsteps, continuing our story, so I made the decision to turn around, but disaster struck on the way back. When an unexpected landslide thundered down the slopes while I was driving through the Rocky Mountains, a deafening roar erupted behind me, and a cloud of dust and debris swallowed the road. Instinctively, I slammed on the brakes, my heart pounding. And then I turned to look for Javier, but all I saw was his RV overturned on the road. Around me, other cars skidded to a stop, people hurried toward the debris, and voices shouted, but I could hear nothing. I could only point with my trembling hands, frantically calling for aid, and someone spoke to me, but their words were lost in my panic. Then everything went dark. I woke up in a hospital bed with 4 in my hand, the warm hues of twilight streaming in through the window, and my head heaving with lightheadedness, but my mind was still clear. A nurse entered, speaking softly. "How are you feeling alive?" I said. The nurse nodded reassuringly. "Oh, you mean that gentleman? He was injured a little more than you, but don't worry, no major issues. The rescue was quick. No concussion. Just some bruises and a minor fracture." I managed a weak smile before my chest clenched with urgency. "How is he?" As soon as I finished my 4, I forced myself to get up and went straight to Javier's room, where he was sitting upright with his arm in a sling and his forehead bandaged. He appeared more worn out and exhausted than I had ever seen him. As soon as his eyes met mine, worry took over his face. "What are you doing here?" he asked in a voice full of incredulity. "I saw your car flip over, and I thought he struggled to rise." Reaching for me, he said, instinctively, as if touching me would be the only way to know I was okay. I pressed him back against the bed. "Okay, but you won't be able to attend Mike's party." Javier scowled, clearly irritated, and after a moment, he murmured, "You should go take a flight, it's safer." I sighed, shaking my head. "You're too elderly to be left alone." While his face softened, something unsaid flickering as I said, "I'm staying to take care of you for a little while because I'm injured." He seemed surprised, but I went on, "I'll call Daniel and let him know once you're well enough. We'll head back together and celebrate with a family dinner. Javier, you and I have decades of history together that don't simply vanish what we are to one another. It transcends love." In his eyes, suddenly, his fingers touched mine, and his voice was rough with passion. "Lizzie, thank you." I stroked his hand lightly and gave him a little grin. Javier sat in silence, his eyes clouded with thoughts I couldn't comprehend, and I stood stretching and nonchalantly said, "Get some rest once we're done with this." At this age, everything short of life and death is no big deal, and no matter what happens, we're always a part of each other's tale. "Don't slow me down, I've got more places to see." He laughed quietly, his eyes streaming a little. After the accident, I stayed by Javier's side while he was covered by the wreck. I didn't fret over him or give him too much attention, but I was for the first time in a long time, Javier let himself be taken care of. It was as if we were back in the good old days. After Javier recovered, we traveled back to Chicago to try to catch up for Mike's visit. They made sure he took his medication, reminded him to rest, and took care of all the little daily tasks he frequently forgot. Our road trip back home was slower than expected, with many pauses so Javier could relax. We stopped at quiet lakes, which featured small-town eateries and scenic overlooks. We weren't in a rush to get anywhere. Instead, we were just enjoying the ride, which brought back memories of our early years when life wasn't about obligations or regrets, but about finding and sharing small pleasures. When we finally got Ollie back in Chicago, I felt as though something had returned, perhaps feelings that Javier and I hadn't experienced in a while. The evening meal for Mike's celebration was lively, full of toasts, laughter, and the glow of pride. Javier refilled my glass of wine before pulling my chair closer. When someone squeaked past behind us. These small gestures, which I had taken for granted for decades, felt like whispers of something unsaid between us that night. I was sitting side by side with parents and grandparents for the first time in years. Javier let out a slow breath, as though he had been holding something within for too long, and he spoke softer than usual as we sat on Daniel's back porch and watched the city lights flicker. "I've been thinking a lot since the accident about everything," he continued, sipping his tea while waiting. He acknowledged that I had been following you on the road for a long time because I wasn't ready to let go and wanted to make sure you were safe. However, after Alaska and the accident, I realized it wasn't about the past anymore, it was about the present. I turned to face him, and his eyes were old but familiar. I thought about what would have happened if that landslide had taken you away, and he kept his fingers on his knee, wondering how many more years I would have had to live knowing that I wasted the time we still had left. I didn't want to waste any more time, Lizzie. I stared at him for a long time. I grabbed for his hand, and he let out a faint sigh of relief. From that night on, we stopped dancing around him. Beside me was not just the man who had loved me for more than 40 years, but also the man who had disappointed me and damaged me. But he had also chosen to stay. Eventually, we decided to travel together rather than individually. I still had places on my list, and Javier, who had been chasing memories for years, finally agreed to be a part of my present. We drove the RVs to the Grand Canyon, hiked the Appalachian trails, and even spent a summer in Maine. Our time together was made special by the little things, like the way he always made sure my tea was brewed perfectly, the way he always gave me the fluffiest pillow whenever we checked into a new place, and the way he still reached for my hand out of habit. We were eating fresh lobster rolls at the docks. When crossing a busy street, life took another unexpected turn one autumn. Javier became ill, but it wasn't life-threatening, but it was serious enough to keep him in the hospital for a while. I sat next to him in that sterile room and watched as his tired eyes dulled, and for the first time since we were reunited, I saw how we were in the last stages of our journey, and time was passing more quickly than either of us could have predicted. We were no longer the college students sneaking kisses between classes, the young parents balancing work and family, or even the middle-aged couple dealing with the difficulties of growing older together. I used to think we had forever, but he whispered, but we don't, do we? I swallowed back the lump in my throat. No, we don't. He made a feeble laugh, so I sat down next to him. One evening, as I was adjusting his blankets, he reached out and gripped my wrist. Javier squeezed my hand and said, "Thank you, Lizzie. We love each other while we still have time, so we make the most of every sunrise, quiet night, and moment we have together." The silence wasn't heavy, rather, it was the kind of silence that comes from knowing someone so well that words are often unnecessary. When he was released, we moved into a comfortable lakeside cabin for our final amazing experience together. The days passed in golden hues, and we woke up to the sun shining. Tears pinched my eyes for still being here, but I smiled since I couldn't imagine where else I would be. Javier wrote me letters, something he had never done before, and left them on my nightstand in my suitcase, tucked into the pages of my journal. He wrote about the day he met me and the years we spent raising a child. After we felt strong enough, we traveled, cooked together, argued, laughed, and reminisced. As we sat by the fire one evening, he turned to face me and said, "You know, I always thought love was about passion, about choosing someone once and never wavering." He laughed and shook his head, but true love, Leslie, is choosing someone. He talked to his family about his mistakes and his gratitude for the second chance. I repeatedly sought his hand and squeezed it firmly, and even after you've seen all of their shortcomings, wounded them, and they've left, you still chose me. Every time he looked at me, Javier's eyes were filled with the years we had spent together. Life was never going to be perfect, but as long as we had each other for however long we had left, that was sufficient.